What's up, heathens? How ya doing? I'm the Godless engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, we're going to be taking another look at Faith Based Apologetics. It's somewhat of a newish YouTube channel where they hope to bring apologetics from a very faith-based position, I guess. Today, Faith Based Apologetics is going to attempt to defend Gary Habermas's minimal facts argument. If you're unaware of Gary Habermas's minimal facts, these are supposedly the minimal facts that everybody, even atheist scholars, will agree to. The problem is that he never cites any atheist scholars that agree with his minimal facts. Also, his minimal facts shrink over time. Today, they've shrunk down to just 4 facts. At one time, it was 12 facts. So if y'all want to fuck around and find out how faith-based apologetics is going to defend Gary Habermas's minimal facts, then please stay tuned. Are you tired of endlessly spelunking in your wallet to get your debit card so you can pay for your copious amounts of liquor? Then you should consider getting a new extra wallet with quick access to your cash and cards while staying RFID protected by visiting the link in the description for 20% off your very own extra wallet. Hello, I'm Burcephus and I don't go anywhere without my extra wallet. It also comes in a fancy ass leather one too.
Today I want to talk about the minimal facts argument, but the question is what is the minimal facts argument? So the minimal facts argument is books in the Bible that atheist scholars agree are possibly credible. These books that are used are Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, and 1st Thessalonians.
Alright, I just need y'all to really remember that he's talking about Paul's authentic letters here. This is going to be very important when he starts listing off these minimal facts, and I think that you'll understand why.
Now, this argument is made popular by Gary Habermas, and the argument goes something like this. Jesus died on a cross, and then he was buried. We find that in John 19:25 through 26.
Okay, I obviously have problems with this first minimal fact. Obviously, he's not pulling from the agreed upon sources that he just mentioned. That's one potential issue, because he cites the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John is not a historical book. In fact, none of the Gospels ever attempt to record history. If you want to, you can go back to my Braxton Hunter video that I did recently, where I extensively go over why the Gospels are not historical accounts of Jesus. I highly suggest you go there to learn more about that particular topic. But back to the point at hand here, there's no evidence that Jesus was crucified, other than the Gospels and then Paul claiming that Jesus died on a cross. There's no corroborating account of Jesus being crucified. Now, it's safe to say that if Jesus did exist in history, and if he did upset the Sanhedrin or upset the Romans at the time, he would have been crucified. It was a very common way to execute criminals, either political or not. It was a very common execution method is my point. But to make the specific claim that Jesus, the original person that started Christianity, died on a cross, we simply have no evidence other than hearsay, and even that hearsay isn't a first-hand account. Because remember, the Gospels are not first-hand accounts. They're not written by people who knew people that were eyewitnesses. Not even Paul is an eyewitness, so the initial list of books that he lists off here, none of that has any eyewitness account at all. Paul gets his information from Scripture and from visions. He makes sure to tell us this in Galatians, one of the approved books that he listed. For I would have you know, brothers, that the gospel that was preached by me is not man's gospel. For I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. Galatians 1:11 through 12. So I'm not exactly sure why you think that this is substantiated by anything other than theology. So I'm not exactly sure why he thinks that Jesus being crucified is supported by anything other than theology.
Jesus' tomb was found empty, and no one has ever produced a body.
So yes, obviously, I have a problem with this one too, because I don't think that Jesus was ever entombed. In fact, given the sources that he used at the very beginning of this section here, Paul's authentic epistles, the best that you could say was that Jesus was buried. And that comes from the Pauline Creed in 1 Corinthians 15, 3-8. It doesn't say entombed or anything like that. But it's also important to note that Paul was not an eyewitness. He got his information from a dead Jew that supposedly resurrected. And of course, he read the scriptures, which the fact that the Messiah would die, be humiliated, and, have people hate him and everything like that, like all of that is in the scriptures. It just kind of seems like to me that Paul could easily get this stuff from the scriptures, and of course, the hallucinations that he had in whatever kind of fashion he had them in.
Jesus' disciples believed that they saw a resurrected Jesus. And we see that in John 20, 19-22.
Well, yes, but again, these are hallucinations. The resurrection appearances can be hallucinations, or they can be whatever you want them to be other than an actual ghostly Jesus appearing to somebody, because that's going to be the least likely explanation for anything. Considering the fact that we don't have any instances in the past about a resurrected Jew or resurrected anybody appearing to their followers afterwards. This would be a special event in history, and it's really hard to prove that, especially when you don't have any eyewitnesses.
And the last and final part of the argument is Jesus' disciples were transformed from their alleged resurrection observation.
Well, right. Well, the best one to use here would be Paul, because Paul talks about how he persecuted Christians prior to being visited by Jesus, and then he turned his act around, and now he doesn't persecute Christians anymore. He's actually preaching the gospel of Jesus. So just because Paul is convinced by something that happened to him or some experience that he had, that means that a Jew resurrected in the first century? I don't see that as being all that convincing. People are convinced of strange things all the time. I mean, you can barely throw a rock without hitting somebody that thinks that Joe Biden is a demonically possessed serpent that stole the election. So just because somebody believed it and they were once not a crazy sumbitch and now they are a crazy sumbitch does not mean that whatever crazy shit they believe is now true.
Now, one thing that I've heard a lot, specifically by followers of Islam, about Jesus not really dying on a cross, that he was not crucified on a cross, that it was really one of his disciples. If we look at John 19, 25-26, we observe that people are standing at the foot of the cross of Christ. And he even speaks to them. Jesus said to his mother and his disciples, whom he loved, standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son."
Well, again, you're using the Gospels as if they're historical accounts. They're not. Like I said before, they're not written by eyewitnesses, and they're also not informed by eyewitnesses. And John's Gospel was written in this early 2nd century. There was no way that they could have had an eyewitness account of what transpired. But regardless of that, the fact that they're not recording history and they're merely recording theology or what people believed about this Jesus figure and not the truth about what happened to Jesus if he were to have existed means that you can't use the Gospels, especially John, in order to verify that, like, Jesus was crucified or any of the other minimal facts that you have listed here. You just cannot use them.
Now, the thing is if that really wasn't Jesus talking, and it was, like, say, Judas is a example that people use all the time. If that was Judas and not Jesus, right, they would have known. There is more to recognizing somebody than just physical appearance. We recognize somebody's voice. We recognize the way people talk. We recognize their isms. There's more to recognizing an individual that goes on psychologically than we really ever think about. There's a reason why we recognize people so quickly, and it isn't just their physical appearance. So the whole point I'm trying to make here is that If it wasn't really Jesus on the cross, even with the physical disfigurement, I would comfortably argue that they would recognize him. Or they would recognize if it wasn't him.
Now, as far as Christian theology goes, I agree that in Christian theology, Jesus was the one up on the cross. There are some ideas out there, some hypotheses about how Jesus could have swapped out with a doppelganger or something like that, or possibly he survived the crucifixion and healed and then, I guess, started walking around on the third day. But the main problem with the minimal facts is that typically what Gary Habermas does is he says that, he's proposed this to like medical experts, and the medical experts said that yes, Jesus definitely died on the cross. But the problem is that requires the gospel accounts to be recording history. And that's essentially what everything he's said so far relies on. The gospels as history, which they're not. But even so, I totally agree with him on the idea that Jesus was on the cross due to the stories that are told in the Gospels.
Now, another objection to this is that Jesus' tomb was empty in the second part of the argument, and nobody's ever produced a body because the body was stolen. That's what is often used. The body was stolen by the disciples.
This represents one of the earliest apologetics against the idea that Jesus resurrected from the dead. It was introduced in Matthew's gospel. In Mark's gospel, you don't have any soldiers, you don't have anybody that's protecting the tomb. There's no way that the tomb is tamper-proof. And, the women get there, they find the tomb empty, and then, of course, tacked onto it later is a post-resurrection appearance of Jesus. But originally in Mark's gospel, the women just run away scared, and that's it. They're told that Jesus has resurrected by, I believe, an angel that appears inside the tomb. But the point is that after Mark was written, you had people that would say, well, the disciples just stole the body, whenever they would hear the story. And so Matthew, the author of Matthew, came back in and was like, how can I get around this? Oh, well, there were guards at the tomb. Matthew's gospel is the only one that has guards at the tomb. The other gospels don't. I don't know why people latch on to the idea that there were guards at the tomb to protect it from people stealing the body. But in any case, Matthew is the only gospel with the guards at the tomb, but it's a counter-apologetic in order to answer the people that say the disciples stole the body. As far as this hypothesis goes, I'm not sold on that idea because of the fact that if the disciples did steal the body and the Romans did put Jesus to death on the cross, then the Romans would have been really pissed off that somebody stole the body and made it seem like Jesus resurrected. So what the Romans would have done at that point is rounded up all of the people that Jesus associated with and they'd kill all of them. And we don't have any records of that happening. There's nothing to suggest that that happened. In fact, there's nothing to suggest that the disciples even existed in history. So it seems quite unlikely that the disciples stealing the body is what really happened. But I will say that the disciples stealing the body is far more likely than Jesus resurrecting from the dead. Stealing a body is a natural explanation for an event in history, and that is going to be many more times likely than a magical Jew resurrecting from the dead.
Here's the thing. If it's a lie, and when they were put to death, the disciples put to death, they're not going to die over a lie. They're not going to be like, well, I guess I'm going to take this one to the grave, George. What do you think? You know what I mean? Like, they're not going to die for a lie. They are going to spill the beans and be like, yep, all right, you caught me.
This notion that nobody would die for a lie is ridiculous. And I don't understand why apologists love to hold on to that idea. And it's flawed in a couple of ways. For one, people die for lies all the time. You could come up with any kind of scenario in which telling a lie, which would result in your death, that would still be the best option for you to do in whatever situation. You can come up with any hypothetical. But in the case of the disciples, considering that there's no evidence that they ever existed, and there's no evidence that they were actually put to death for their faith or given a chance to recant, I would say that it's more likely than not the people that were being put to death for their faith and given a chance to recant are people that are so far removed from the original events, if they even occurred, that they would have wholly believed in the faith. They would have wholly believed in the idea that Jesus resurrected from the dead. The originators of the Christian cult in the first century were simply not persecuted for their faith or given a chance to recount or anything of that nature. So to use this as an argument that the disciples would have given up the entire trick when they were persecuted and killed just seems to not match up with history, like, at all. Or even logic, because if they were wanting to create this new religion, if they were wanting it to succeed and everything like that, I can definitely see them dying for a lie at that point. But again, that's speculation. It's also speculation that they were persecuted and killed for their faith.
Now, the third part of the argument, it states that Jesus' disciples believe that they saw a resurrected Christ from the dead. Now, this argument is really strong, and people try to debunk this as some group hallucination or some sort of group grieving hallucination. But all these people saw the same thing. There's never been in all of history a group hallucination where everybody saw the same exact thing.
I would need a citation on this, citation fucking needed on this particular one, because group hallucinations have been known to occur. Sure, they're super rare, but they do occur. One of my go-to group hallucinations that I regularly mention is the miracle of the sun, or the miracle of Fatima. That's where in Fatima, Spain, you had this huge group of people that saw the sun dance in the sky. That was a group hallucination. So yes, obviously group hallucinations can and do occur. One critical problem that he has in this section is that he assumes that everybody saw the exact same thing. At no point in Paul's writings, or even in the Gospels or Acts, do you have people saying that they all saw the exact same thing. You cannot support this with any scripture or epistle. And of course, what I think that he's ultimately mentioning here is the Pauline Creed, where 500 people supposedly saw Jesus. Using that as your barometer for what these people experienced, if they even existed, you cannot discern what they actually saw. In Galatians, when Paul is conferring with the other apostles, he only confirms the message of Jesus and not what he has hallucinated. Like, he doesn't try to visually confirm what Jesus looked like or anything. He just confirms the message of Jesus, which the message of Jesus is contained in the Old Testament. And that's where he got a bulk of the information about Jesus. And of course, his hallucinations also informed him. But for the bulk of it, he gets it from scripture. And it's very important to note that when Paul confirmed the message of Jesus with the other apostles didn't have anything extra to tell him, because he was telling the exact same message as they were telling. So he received no new information from the other apostles. And finally, how are we supposed to know who exactly had this vision of Jesus and the 500 witnesses that Paul talks about? He doesn't give us any kind of identifying information about who these people were, how to find them, or when he heard about this from those 500 witnesses. And there's a really good argument that shows how this part of Paul's epistles could have been interpolated. It's just one simple, common spelling mistake away from just Jesus appearing over the Pentecost, not to 500 witnesses. So in reality, who do you have that is having these hallucinations of Jesus? Well, you've got Peter, you've got James. That's three people having hallucinations. And these three people were also reading the scriptures to get their information about Jesus. They just so happened to come to the same conclusions about Jesus.
And the fact that the people who saw the resurrected Christ wasn't just the 12 disciples, it was more than 500 people that saw the resurrected Christ. So the third part of the argument is very powerful, in my opinion. And I think the evidence that is the most damning in this argument is the fact that Jesus's disciples were transformed, right? Not a physical transformation, but their attitude had a transformation. They spiritually had a transformation. They were more bold. They were more outspoken about. Because if you go back and read in the scriptures, read in John, people that were denying Christ, like Peter denying Christ 3 times. And then all of a sudden, he's out open air preaching, telling these people what they did to Jesus, using such boldness and power in his words. There was a actual spiritual transformation there.
Well, yes, in the stories, there was a powerful transformation. One thing that confuses me about this particular section is that he never connects this with Paul's authentic epistles. I mean, he lists them out at the beginning as supporting these minimal facts, but then he never ever uses them in his video at all. It's a little confusing. In fact, in this particular section, I would have expected him to bring up how Paul was radically transitioned from a persecutor of Christians into pushing Jesus' message. That seems to be the apt example to bring up here. But instead, he goes to the Gospels or Acts. He brings up Peter and his transformation. I guess I don't understand why you would even mention Paul's authentic epistles if you're never going to use them for anything in your video. But again, like I've already stated, just because somebody is convinced of some kind of crazy thing does not make that crazy thing true. I'm sure that you can think of many different conspiracy theories right now where somebody was totally against conspiracy theories and then they got suckered into QAnon conspiracy theories, and now they're radical and storming the Capitol on January 6th. Just because somebody is convinced of a crazy thing does not make the crazy thing true. And this is especially true when you get to the epistles and especially the Gospels and Acts. Just because the story says that they were radically transformed does not mean they were actually radically transformed. And it doesn't mean that the events that they believe happened actually happened.
So something happened to Peter between point A and point B. So again, there's this spiritual change that's happening to these people. The question that somebody may ask is, why has there been such a dramatic change from point A to point B? Maybe because that it's true, that they really saw the resurrected Christ, that they really had a real life experience that wasn't just a figment of their imagination. Maybe what they saw was more real than what you or I have ever seen before.
I'm sorry, did you just say that the experiences of the disciples who probably didn't ever exist is more real than reality? Because I'm experiencing reality right now, and you're saying that their experience was more real than reality? I kind of feel like he's playing with the whole, well, it's possible, therefore it's probable. It's possible that a Jew resurrected in the first century scared the shit out of his disciples at the time, and they radically transformed their lives. Sure, that's perfectly possible. I mean, technically anything's possible, I guess, but that doesn't make it probable. What probably happened is people had hallucinations and they read the scriptures as denoted by Paul in his letter to the Galatians, and they came up with this new version of Judaism. And it was readily accepted by the Jewish community because it uses the scriptures in the form of the Septuagint in order to inform the message of Jesus. So they were already expecting the Messiah to be saying the things that they're saying the Messiah is saying. Miracles are always going to be the least likely solution to any event that's happened in history. The resurrection of Jesus is definitely a miracle and is therefore the least likely option in this scenario. Any natural explanation for what we find in the epistles, or in the Gospels for that matter, is going to be a more likely conclusion. Well, heathens, that's going to be it for this video today. If you will, please go down below and let me know what you thought about Faith-Based Apologetics' attempt to defend the minimal facts argument. I don't think that it was all that impressive, and I really don't think that he defended them all that well. Still not convinced of the minimal facts, and I still have yet to hear what atheist scholars agree that all of these things are true. So let me know what you guys think down below. And hey, while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of video. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens!